People think being a billionaire is about the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want. They imagine my life as a constant stream of private jets, Michelin-star dinners, and women who look like they walked straight off a runway. And sure, on paper, that's exactly what it is. My name is Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries, and my net worth is a number most people would struggle to conceptualize. But let me tell you the truth about nights like tonight. They are a prison. A prison with golden bars, crystal champagne flutes, and a dress code that costs more than a mid-size sedan, but a prison nonetheless. I stood at the edge of the obsidian hall, swirling a glass of scotch I didn't even want, watching the sharks circle. That's what I call them. The investors, the social climbers, the desperate fathers trying to marry off their daughters to the highest bidder. Tonight was the annual masquerade charity gala for the city's hospital wing, an event where the masks were supposed to offer anonymity, but in reality everyone knew exactly who everyone was, based on the cut of their suits and the size of the diamonds around their necks. I was wearing a matte black Venetian mask that covered the upper half of my face, but it didn't matter. They knew the posture. They knew the bespoke tuxedo. They knew the power radiating off me like a heat wave. I checked my watch. 9:15 p.m. I had promised my PR manager I would stay until at least 10 Traukarn to secure the headline donation. 45 more minutes of meaningless small talk. 45 more minutes of women laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, touching my arm with calculated intimacy, looking at me like I was a winning lottery ticket rather than a human being. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one I never spoke about to anyone, the profound, echoing loneliness of being the most powerful man in the room. I needed air. I needed to get away from the perfume and the ambition choking the air inside. The ballroom. I signaled to my security detail to stay back. A rare command, but my head of security, Marcus, knew the look in my eyes. He gave a curt nod and faded into the shadows. I slipped through the heavy velvet curtains and stepped out onto the north terrace. The silence out there was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the city traffic 20 stories down, and the muffled sound of the string quartet playing inside. The winter air was biting, sharp against my skin, but it felt real. It was the first real thing I had felt all day. I walked to the stone balustrade, took a deep breath, and prepared to enjoy 5 minutes of solitude before the sharks found me again. But I wasn't alone. She was standing in the far corner of the terrace, almost blending into the shadows of a large potted cypress tree. She wasn't wearing a mask. That was the first thing that struck me. In a sea of people desperate to hide behind gilded facades, she was barefaced. She was leaning against the cold stone railing, her shoulders hunched slightly, shivering. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a simple floor-length dress in a shade of pale blue that looked almost gray in the moonlight. I froze. My instinct was to leave, to find another balcony where I could be truly alone, but something about her posture stopped me. She didn't look like the other women inside. She wasn't holding a phone, checking her reflection, or scanning the room for someone important. She was just staring at the stars, and she was crying. It was a silent kind of crying. No sobbing, no shaking, just tears tracking silver lines down her cheeks in the moonlight. She looked exhausted, not the "I partied too hard in Ibiza" kind of exhausted, but a deep, soul-weary exhaustion that I recognized instantly because I felt it every time I looked in the mirror. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, gone back inside, and bought another hospital wing just to feel something. But my feet moved on their own. I approached slowly, making sure my footsteps on the stone alerted her so I wouldn't startle her. "It's a little cold for stargazing without a coat," I said, my voice low. She jumped, her hand flying to her chest. She turned to face me, and for a second, the air left my lungs. She wasn't classically beautiful in the way the women inside were. She didn't have the heavy contouring or the lip fillers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, slightly messy bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. But her eyes, they were large, dark, and filled with a terrifying amount of honesty. I'm sorry," she stammered, quickly wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I didn't know anyone was out here. I'll leave." "No," I said, quicker than I intended. I took off my tuxedo jacket, the heavy silk warm from my body, and held it out to her. "Don't leave on my account. I was just escaping the sharks myself." She looked at the jacket like it was a bomb. Then she looked at my masked face. She didn't seem to recognize me. That was new. Usually the moment I spoke, people's eyes lit up with dollar signs. But she just looked confused and wary. "Sharks?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The people inside." I gestured toward the glowing ballroom. Too many teeth, not enough heart. A small, hesitant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It transformed her face, making her look younger, softer. "That's a very specific description for a party." "It's not a party," I corrected, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "It's a battlefield with hors d'oeuvres. Take the jacket, please. You're shivering, and I'm used to the cold." She hesitated for another second, then reached out and took it. Her hands were rough. That was the second thing I noticed. The women I dated had hands soft as butter, manicured to perfection. Her hands were red from the cold, with short, unpolished nails and dry skin. They were working hands. She wrapped the jacket around her shoulders, and it swallowed her small frame. She pulled the lapels tight, burying her nose in the fabric for a split second before realizing I was watching. "Thank you," she whispered. "It smells expensive." I laughed, a genuine short bark of laughter that surprised me. "It smells like cedar and too much scotch, I'm afraid. I'm Julian." I waited for the reaction, the gasp, the change in demeanor, the sudden flirtatious tilt of the head. Everyone knew the name Julian Thorne, but she just nodded, tightening the jacket around herself. "I'm Elena. Just Elena. Just Elena," she affirmed. She looked back out at the city skyline. "You don't like the party, Julian?" She said my name so casually, without the weight of my bank account attached to it. It was intoxicating. "I hate it," I admitted, moving to stand next to her, leaning my back against the railing so I could watch her profile. "It's loud, it's fake, and everyone wants something from me. What about you? Why are you hiding in the dark, Elena?" She looked down at her hands. "I'm not hiding, I'm just taking a break. It's overwhelming in there." "You don't have a mask," I noted. "I didn't think I needed one," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would be looking at me anyway." "Then they're blind," I said. It slipped out before I could filter it. It was a smooth line, the kind I'd use to charm a board member's wife. But this time, I meant it. In a room full of peacocks screaming for attention, she was a dove, quiet, unassuming, and utterly captivating. She blushed, looking down at her shoes. I noticed then that her shoes were simple black flats, worn at the toes, not heels. Practical, comfortable. Everything about her screamed simplicity in a world of excess. "So, Elena," I said, turning my body fully toward her, "since we are both hiding from the sharks and I have about 40 minutes before I have to go back in there and pretend to care about the price of caviar, would you do me the honor of keeping me, company? I promise I won't bite. I'm a vegetarian shark." She looked at me, searching my eyes behind the mask. She was assessing safety, I realized. Not status, not wealth, but safety. After a long moment, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but only if you promise not to talk about business. I don't think my brain can handle any more talk about mergers or stocks." I smiled, and for the first time in years, I felt the knot of tension in my chest loosen. "Deal. No business. Let's talk about the stars. You were looking at them like they owed you money." She laughed then, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to warm the freezing air between us. "Not money," she said, "just answers." And just like that, on a freezing terrace above a city that worshipped money, I fell into conversation with a woman who didn't know who I was, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to tell her. I wanted to be just Julian. I wanted to see where this night would go if the billions weren't standing between us. I had no idea that I was walking straight into a situation that would break me apart and put me back together again. I had no idea that the woman wearing my jacket was hiding a secret much bigger than my bank account. "Answers?" I leaned back against the stone railing, genuinely intrigued. Usually, conversations at these events revolved around which politician was sleeping with whom, or which yacht was docked in Monaco. "What kind of answers are you looking for up there?" Elena hesitated, pulling my jacket tighter around her shoulders. It was comically large on her, the sleeves covering her hands completely. She looked small, fragile, but there was a steel in her eyes that fascinated me. "Just why things happen the way they do," she said softly, turning her gaze back to the sky. "Why some people have so much and others have so little. Why life feels like a game where the rules are rigged against you before you even start playing." I felt a pang of guilt. I knew exactly which side of that rigged game I stood on. I was the house. The house always wins. It sounds like you've had a rough hand dealt to you, I said carefully. You could say that, she replied with a dry, humorless laugh. But I'm not complaining. Everyone has their struggles, even people in tuxedos hiding on balconies. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, I felt exposed even behind my mask. Touché, I murmured. So tell me, Elena, if you weren't at this battlefield with hors d'oeuvres, where would you rather be right now? She didn't even have to think about it. Home, in my pajamas, eating popcorn and watching a movie that doesn't require any brain power. Maybe something with explosions or a talking dog. I laughed again, louder this time. The sound echoed off the stone walls. A talking dog? Really? Don't judge. She grinned, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Sometimes you just need to believe the world is simple and happy. For 2 hours. What about you, Mr. Shark? Where would you be? Honestly, I looked out at the city lights, the empire I helped build, the golden cage I lived in, probably exactly where you described. Pajamas, popcorn, no talking dogs though. Maybe a documentary about, I don't know, deep-sea creatures. Something quiet. Deep-sea creatures. She repeated, amused. Because you relate to the pressure? I stared at her. It was a joke, a throwaway line, but it hit me squarely in the chest. How? Did she see that? How did a stranger on a balcony understand more about my life in 5 minutes than the women I'd dated for months? Something like that, I admitted, my voice dropping an octave. It's heavy down here sometimes. We stood in silence for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, companionable, the kind of silence you share with an old friend, not a stranger you just met. The wind picked up, rustling the cypress branches, and she shivered again. You're cold, I said, stepping closer, instinct taking over. We should go inside, or at least get you a warm drink. No, she said quickly, taking a step back. I mean, I can't go back in there. Not yet. I just need a few more minutes. Okay? I nodded, respecting her boundaries. Then tell me something else. Anything. Tell me about the best meal you've ever had. She smiled, a wistful look crossing her face. My grandmother's lasagna. It wasn't fancy. She used cheap cheese and sometimes the pasta was a little overcooked, but it tasted like love, you know? Like safety. I do, I lied. My meals were prepared by private chefs who prioritized presentation over love. I couldn't remember the last time food made me feel safe. It sounds incredible. It was, she sighed. What about you? Best meal? I racked my brain. Truffles in Alba, sushi in Tokyo, a steak that cost more than my first car. None of it felt right. None of it felt real compared to her lasagna. A hot dog, I said suddenly, from a street cart in New York. It was 2 a.m., it was raining, and I had just closed my first major deal. I was soaked, exhausted, and starving. That hot dog tasted like victory. She looked at me with wide eyes. A hot dog? Really? Don't judge, I echoed her earlier words, grinning. We talked for what felt like hours, but according to my watch, was only 20 minutes. We talked about movies, about travel. She dreamed of seeing Italy. I told her about the Amalfi Coast without mentioning the yacht, about books. She was smart, sharp, funny. She had a way of looking at the world that was both cynical and hopeful at the same time. And the entire time, she didn't ask about my money. She didn't ask about my company. She didn't try to get closer or touch me. She just talked to me. Julian, the man behind the mask. I have to go, she said abruptly, looking at her cheap plastic watch. Oh my God, look at the time. I'm late. Late for what? I asked, disappointed. I didn't want her to leave. I wanted to cancel the rest of my night, take her to the finest restaurant in the city and just listen to her talk until sunrise. Just late, she said evasively, starting to slip my jacket off her shoulders. Keep it, I said, putting a hand on her arm to stop her. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me that I hadn't felt in years. Her skin was warm now, soft. It's freezing. You can give it back later. I can't, she stammered, looking panicked. I won't see you later. I don't even know who you are. I'm Julian, I repeated, and I have a feeling we'll see each other again. Please, keep the jacket. Consider it collateral so you have to come find me. She looked at the jacket, then at me. Conflict warred in her eyes. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you, Julian, for being a vegetarian shark. Anytime, Elena. She turned and practically ran toward the service doors, not the main entrance. I watched her go, a slender figure swallowed by my expensive tuxedo jacket disappearing into the shadows. I stood there for a long moment, the cold biting at my shirt sleeves, feeling strangely bereft. Who was she? Why did she run? And why did the thought of never seeing her again make my chest ache? Mr. Thorne? I turned to see Marcus, my security chief, standing in the doorway. He looked concerned. Sir, the board members are asking for you. The donation presentation starts in 10 minutes. I'm coming, I said, my voice rough. I walked back, into the ballroom, the noise and heat hitting me like a physical blow. The masks, the diamonds, the fake smiles. It all looked even more grotesque now, after the purity of the terrace. I went through the motions. I shook hands. I made the speech. I signed the check for the hospital wing, but my mind was outside in the cold, with a girl named Elena who liked lasagna and talking dogs. As the night wound down, I found myself scanning the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Maybe she was a guest I hadn't recognized. Maybe she was a +1, but she was nowhere to be seen. Marcus, I said quietly as we headed toward the exit. Find out who was on the guest list named Elena. No last name, just Elena. Yes, sir, Marcus said, tapping something into his phone. I got into my waiting limousine feeling heavier than usual. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails I didn't care about, when Marcus opened the front passenger door and looked back at me. Sir, he said, his expression unreadable. There was no Elena on the guest list. I frowned. That's impossible. I spoke to her for 20 minutes. She was on the North Terrace. I checked the staff list too, sir, Marcus continued. There were 3 Elenas working tonight. 1 in the kitchen, 1 in coat check, and 1 on the cleaning crew. My heart stopped. The service doors, the plain dress, the rough hands, the panic about being late. Cleaning crew? I repeated. Yes, sir. Elena Rossi. She clocked out 20 minutes. I sat back against the leather seat, the realization hitting me like a freight train. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a socialite hiding from the paparazzi. She was staff, and she had just walked off with a $5,000 tuxedo jacket belonging to the CEO of the company sponsoring the event. But it wasn't the jacket I cared about. It was her. Take me home, Marcus, I said, staring out the window at the passing city lights, and find out everything you can about Elena Rossi. Next morning I woke up with a headache and a determination I hadn't felt in months. I had her name. I had her place of employment, a staffing agency that contracted for the gala, and I had a plan. I wasn't going to send a private investigator. I wasn't going to send flowers, that was too easy. To billionaire. She liked simple. She liked real. So I was going to do something I hadn't done in 10 years. I was going to go find her myself. At 10 a.m., I walked into the staffing agency's office, in a dusty part of downtown. The receptionist looked at my suit like I was an alien. Can I help you? She popped her gum. I'm looking for Elena Rossi, I said, flashing my most charming, non-threatening smile. I believe she has something of mine. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. Elena? She's out on a job. Big house in the hills. Why? Did she steal something? No, I said sharply. She borrowed something. Where is she working? The receptionist scribbled an address on a sticky note. Don't get her in trouble. She's a good kid, works hard. I have no intention of getting her in trouble, I promised, taking the note. I looked at the address. 1400 Mulholland Drive. My eyebrows shot up. That was the Whitman estate. Old money. Very old, very snobby money. I got back in my car and drove myself. No driver, just me. I needed to see her. I needed to know if the connection I felt on the balcony was real or just a product of the moonlight and champagne. When I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Whitman estate, I buzzed the intercom. Delivery for Elena Rossi, I lied. Service entrance around back, a voice crackled. I drove around to the back, parking my Aston Martin next to a beat-up Toyota Corolla. I got out, adjusting my tie, suddenly nervous. Why was I nervous? I negotiated billion-dollar deals for breakfast. This was just a girl. I knocked on the heavy wooden service door. It opened a moment later, and there she was. She was wearing a gray uniform that looked 2 sizes too big, her hair pulled back in the same messy bun, but this time covered by a hairnet. She held a feather duster in one hand and a bottle of polish in the other. When she saw me, the blood drained from her face. She dropped the feather duster. "Julian?" she whispered. "Hello, Elena?" I smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "I believe you have my jacket." She looked at me, then at the car behind me, then back at my face. Her eyes filled with panic, not happiness. You shouldn't be here," she stammered, looking over her shoulder into the house. "You have to go." "Why?" I asked, confused. "I just wanted to see you. We had a connection, Elena. Don't tell me you didn't feel it." "It doesn't matter what I felt," she hissed, stepping out and pulling the door almost closed behind her. "You don't understand. I'm not who you think I am." "I know," I said gently. "I know you work for the agency. I know you weren't a guest. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care about your job, Elena. I care about you." She stared at me, her eyes welling up with tears again. "You don't get it. It's not just a job. If they see you here, if she sees you here." "Who?" "My boss, Mrs. Whitman. She hates you, Julian. Her husband lost millions in your last merger. If she finds out I know you, she'll fire me. And I can't lose this job. I really, really can't." I felt a surge of anger. Not at her, but at the situation. At the fact that my world, my money, my power, was a threat to her survival. "I won't let that happen," I promised. "I'll talk to her. No." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, just go. If you care about me at all, just go. Please." Her desperation was palpable. It broke my heart. I wanted to sweep her away, tell her she never had to work for people like the Whitmans again, but I knew that would scare her off. I had to play the long game. "Okay," I said, backing away. "Okay, I'm leaving. But this isn't over, Elena. I'm not letting you go that easily." "Please," she whispered, a tear escaping. "Just forget about me." She slipped back inside and closed the door with a definitive click. I stood there in the service driveway, staring at the closed door. Forget about her? Impossible. I was Julian Thorne. I didn't give up on things I wanted. And I realized, with a jolt of clarity that shook me to my core, that I didn't just want the deal, or the merger, or the next big win. I wanted the girl with the lasagna stories and the sad eyes, and I was going to figure out how to be in her life without destroying it, even if I had to lie, even if I had to pretend to be someone else, or even if I had to buy the whole damn staffing agency. Buy the staffing agency? Marcus looked at me from the passenger seat of the Maybach as if I had suggested we invest in a company that manufactured square wheels. "Sir, with all due respect, you acquire tech giants and energy conglomerates. You don't buy domestic staffing firms." "I do now," I said, scrolling through the agency's financials on my tablet. It was a small operation, clean books, decent margins, terrible marketing. "It's an investment, Marcus, diversifying the portfolio." "It's a girl, sir," Marcus corrected, his voice flat. He had been with me for 10 years. He knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. "It's not just a girl," I snapped, closing the tablet a little too hard. "It's complicated." It had been 3 days since I showed up at the Whitman estate and practically gave Elena a panic attack. 3 days of me pacing in my office, staring at the city view that suddenly felt too empty, too quiet. I couldn't just barge back into her life. I was radioactive to her. My presence was a threat to her livelihood, so I had to change the rules of the game. If I own the agency, I reasoned out loud, more to myself than to Marcus, I control the assignments. I can assign her to safer environments, better pay, less hostile employers, like your penthouse. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No," I said quickly. "That's too obvious. She'd know it was me. She's smart, Marcus. Scary smart. If I just pluck her out and put her in my house, she'll feel like a charity case. Or worse, she'll think I'm trying to buy her. Aren't you?" "I'm trying to buy her freedom," I corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I ignored him. "I need a reason to see her. A legitimate, non-threatening reason where the power dynamic isn't billionaire versus Maid. I need to be just a guy." "You are Julian Thorne," Marcus said dryly. "You haven't been just a guy since you were 12. Details," I waved a hand. "Here's the plan. We acquire the agency by Friday. Silent acquisition. No press releases, no name changes, just a back-end ownership transfer. Then we create a new high-priority contract for a specific client who needs a dedicated, long-term housekeeper, excellent pay, full benefits, flexible hours. And who is this mysterious client? A reclusive author, I improvised. Someone who travels a lot. Someone who needs the house kept in order but is rarely there. That gives her stability without the constant pressure of a boss breathing down her neck. And how does this help you see her? Because, I smiled, a plan forming in my mind that was equal parts brilliant and insane. The reclusive author is going to be my cousin, or rather, a property I own under a shell company, and I just happen to be the cousin who stops by to check on the place. Marcus sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man who realized his boss had finally cracked. This is a rom-com plot, sir, and usually, those end with someone running through an airport. I own the airport, Marcus. Nobody's running anywhere. By Monday, the deal was done. I was the proud, silent owner of Elite Staffing Solutions. By Tuesday, Elena Rossi had been reassigned. I insisted on seeing the file myself. Elena Rossi, 26 years old, high school, valedictorian, dropped out of college 3 years ago. Reason, family emergency. Financial records showed massive medical debts attached to her mother's name. Deceased. My chest tightened as I read it. She had given up her future to pay for a ghost. She was working 60-hour weeks scrubbing floors to pay off debts that weren't even hers anymore. She accepted the assignment. The agency manager told me over the phone, sounding confused but happy about the sudden influx of capital. She was, suspicious about the pay increase, but she took it. She starts tomorrow at the Blackwood property. The Blackwood property was a brownstone I bought 3 years ago. I had Marcus sweep the place the night before she started, removing every piece of mail, every photo, and every monogrammed towel that bore the name Thorne. It had to be a ghost house, perfect for a reclusive author. Wednesday morning, I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street from the brownstone, wearing jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap. I hadn't worn a hoodie in public since college. I felt ridiculous. I felt exhilaratingly normal. I watched as Elena walked up the steps. She hesitated at the door, checking the address on her phone. She looked tired, but there was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there at the gala. The relief of a steady, well-paying job. She keyed in the code and went inside. I waited an hour, just enough time for her to get settled, to realize the house was empty and safe. Then I grabbed 2 coffees and walked across the street. I rang the doorbell. Elena opened it a moment later, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. She looked from me to the street, then back to me. You, she breathed. How? Hello, Elena, I said, holding up the coffees. I hear my cousin finally hired someone competent. I thought I'd stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood. Your cousin? She frowned, confusion warring with suspicion. Mr. Blackwood is your cousin? Distant cousin. I lied smoothly. Eccentric guy. Writes horror novels. Never leaves his room when he's writing, which is why the place is always empty. I keep an eye on it for him. She stared at me, searching for the lie. I kept my face open. Friendly. Just Julian. Just a guy in a hoodie. You're wearing a hoodie, she noted, sounding skeptical. I told you, I grinned. Vegetarian shark. We have layers. Can I come in? I brought peace offerings. Cafe mocha, extra foam. I guessed. She looked at the coffee, then at me. You guessed my coffee order? Lucky guess? She bit her lip, fighting a smile. You are relentless, Julian. I prefer persistent. It sounds more professional. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Okay, you can come in. But if Mr. Blackwood comes out and yells at us, I'm blaming you. Deal. I walked into the house, my house, and felt a strange sense of victory. I was inside. She wasn't running. And for the next hour, sitting at the kitchen island, while she organized the pantry, we just talked. I learned she loved old movies because they were the only things she and her mom used to watch together in the hospital. I learned she was terrified of thunderstorms. I learned she had a sketchbook hidden in her bag where she drew dress designs she would never make. Why don't you make them? I asked, pointing at a sketch of a flowing evening gown that looked better than anything I'd seen on a runway. Fabric costs money, she shrugged, stacking. Cans of soup. Time costs money. Everything costs money, Julian. Dreams are expensive. Not all of them, I said softly. Some are just waiting for the right investor. She stopped what she was doing and looked at me. Are you an investor, Julian? You never actually told me what you do. You just said you were a shark. I froze. I hadn't thought about this part. If I told her I was the CEO of Thorne Industries, the spell would break. She'd see the billionaire, not the guy in the hoodie. I work in finance, I equivocated. Boring stuff, spreadsheets, numbers. Nothing as creative as this. I tapped the sketchbook. Finance, she repeated, unimpressed. So you help rich people get richer? Sometimes, I admitted. And sometimes I try to help. Fix things. Fix things? Broken systems. Bad situations. I looked her in the eye. People who deserve a break. The air between us charged again. That same magnetic pull from the balcony. She leaned in slightly, her eyes searching mine. You're a strange man, Julian, she whispered. You wear hoodies that cost more than my rent. You show up at my jobs. You buy me coffee. And yet, I don't feel like running away. That's progress. I smiled. I'll take it. Just then, my phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. You should get that, Elena said, pulling back. Important finance stuff? I pulled it out. It was Marcus. Code red. Board meeting moved up. They know about the acquisition. You need to be here. Now. I cursed internally. The real world was intruding on my perfect little bubble. I have to go, I said, standing up. Emergency at the spreadsheet factory. She laughed. Go, save the numbers. I'll be back, I promised, pausing at the door. Tomorrow? Same time? I'll bring lunch. Maybe, she teased. If you bring lasagna. Done. I walked out of the house feeling like I was walking on air. I had done it. I had bridged the gap. We were friends. Maybe more. But as I got into the car, where Marcus was waiting with a grim face, I knew I was playing a dangerous game. I was lying to her about who I was, about who owned the house, about everything except how I felt. They're asking questions, Julian, Marcus said as we peeled away from the curb. The board. They want to know why you bought a staffing agency. They think you're losing focus. Let them think what they want, I said, watching the brownstone disappear in the rearview mirror. I've never been more focused in my life. And when she finds out? Marcus asked quietly. Because she will, sir. Secrets like this, they have a shelf life. I'll tell her, I said, when the time is right, when she trusts me enough that the money won't matter. And when will that be? Soon, I said. I hope. But soon came faster than I expected, and not in the way I planned. 3 weeks later, we had fallen into a rhythm. I would visit my cousin 3 times a week. We ate lunch together. We talked. I even helped her fix a leaky faucet. With Marcus texting me instructions from the car, I was falling for her, hard, and I could tell she was feeling it too. The way she lit up when I arrived, the way our conversations lingered. Then came the gala, another one, the Tech Innovators Ball. I couldn't get out of it. It was my industry. I had to be the keynote speaker. I was backstage, adjusting my tie in the mirror, looking at the billionaire staring back at me. I hated him. I wanted to be the guy in the hoodie. 5 minutes, Mr. Thorne, a stage manager called out. I walked toward the curtain, my mind on Elena. I was going to tell her tonight. After this speech, I would go to her apartment, confess everything, and ask her to give us a real shot. No more lies. I stepped out onto the stage. The lights blinded me. The applause was deafening. I walked to the podium, put on my professional smile, and looked out at the sea of faces. And there, in the 3rd row, standing next to a tray of champagne glasses, was Elena. She was working the event. She wasn't looking at the tray. She was looking at me, at the giant screen behind me that said, Julian Thorne, CEO, at the tuxedo, at the man she thought was a cousin who worked in boring finance. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't shocked. It was shattered. It was the look of someone who had finally allowed herself to trust, only to realize the entire foundation of that trust was a lie. I stopped mid-sentence. The teleprompter scrolled on, but I couldn't speak. Julian? Someone whispered over the earpiece. Elena locked eyes with me. She didn't say a word. She just slowly took off her apron, folded it neatly over her arm, and turned around. She walked toward the exit, weaving through the tables of billionaires and tech moguls. Wait, I shouted. Not into the microphone, but it picked it up anyway. It boomed through the hall. Elena! The crowd gasped. Heads turned. I didn't care. I jumped off the stage. Actually jumped. 5 feet down. I landed. Badly, stumbling, but I kept moving. I ran down the center aisle, ignoring the confused grabs of board members and the flashing cameras. Elena! I burst through the double doors just in time to see her getting into a taxi. "Elena, please." I reached the curb just as the door slammed shut. She looked at me through the glass. She was crying again. But this time, they weren't the silent, hopeful tears of the balcony. They were tears of betrayal. "Drive," she mouthed to the driver. The taxi pulled away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk in my $5,000 tuxedo, realizing that for all my money, all my power, and all my strategy, I had just lost the only thing that actually mattered. And this time, I didn't know if I could buy my way back in. The cameras flashed like lightning storms, blinding and relentless. "Mr. Thorne, who was that woman?" "Julian. Is the merger in trouble?" "Mr. Thorne, look this way." I stood on the sidewalk, the cold night air biting through my thin dress shirt. I had left my jacket on the stage, abandoned like my dignity. Marcus appeared beside me, a wall of muscle and grim efficiency, shielding me from the paparazzi vultures. "Sir, get in the car," Marcus hissed, his hand gripping my arm. "We need to leave. Now." "She took a taxi," I murmured, staring at the empty space where the yellow cab had vanished. "Marcus, she took a taxi." "I know, sir. Get in the car." I slumped into the back of the Maybach, the silence of the insulated cabin, deafening after the chaos outside. My phone was vibrating incessantly. The board, PR, my mother, everyone wanted to know why the CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries had just sprinted out of his own keynote speech to chase a member of the catering staff. "Find her," I said, my voice hoarse. "Sir?" Marcus looked at me in the rearview mirror, and for the first time, he looked tired. "She quit. The agency called 5 minutes ago. She sent a text. I quit. Do not contact me. She blocked their number. She blocked yours. I don't care," I snapped, though the panic was rising in my throat like bile. "Go to her apartment, the address from her file. We're already heading there," Marcus said softly. "But sir, prepared yourself. She might not want to be found." We drove in silence to a part of the city I had only ever seen on zoning maps. The streets got narrower, the streetlights dimmer. Graffiti replaced billboards. My sleek black armored car looked like a spaceship landed in a war zone. We pulled up to a crumbling brick walk-up. The front door had a broken lock. There was no doorman, no security, just a flickering fluorescent light buzzing in the entryway. "Wait here," I told Marcus. "Sir, this neighborhood?" I said wait. I got out. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the smell of stale cooking oil and damp carpet filling my nose. I found apartment 3B. I raised my hand to knock, and for a second, my hand trembled. I had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with warlords and hostile governments without blinking, but knocking on this chipped green door terrified me. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again. "Elena, it's Julian. Please, just open the door." "Nothing. I know you're in there," I said, leaning my forehead against the wood. I saw the light under the door. "Elena, please, let me explain." The lock clicked. The door opened 2 inches, held by a chain. One eye peered out. It was red-rimmed, swollen, and furious. "Go away," she said, her voice flat. "I can't," I pleaded. "Elena, I didn't want you to find out like that. I was going to tell you tonight, I swear." "You were going to tell me?" She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "When? After you played cousin for another week? After you laughed at me for scrubbing your floors while you secretly owned the building?" "I never laughed at you," I said intensely. "Never. I bought the agency to protect you. I assigned you to the brownstone so you wouldn't have to deal with people like the Whitmans. I wanted you safe. You wanted to control me," she shouted, and the chain rattled. "You bought my life, Julian. You manipulated my job, my income, my reality. Do you have any idea how violating that feels? I thought I was finally catching a break. I thought I was finally good enough, but it was just you. It was always just you, pulling strings from your ivory tower. I fell in love with you," I yelled back, the truth ripping out of me. "I did it because I fell in love with you on that balcony, and I knew if I told you who I was, you'd run. And I was right, wasn't I? Look at you now." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "You're right," she whispered. "I am running. Because you're a liar, Julian. You pretended to be a normal guy. You pretended to understand what it's like to struggle. You sat in that kitchen and let me talk about how expensive fabric is, knowing you could buy a textile factory with your pocket change. You made me feel foolish. I made you feel seen, I countered, my voice dropping. Those lunches, the talks, that was real. All of it. The guy in the hoodie, that's who I want to be. That's who I am with you. But that guy doesn't exist, she said, closing the door slightly. Julian Thorne exists, and Julian Thorne is a billionaire who thinks he can write a check to fix a human being. Goodbye, Julian. Elena, wait. The door slammed. The deadbolt slid home. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the chipped paint, listening to the sound of her footsteps retreating inside. I had never felt more powerless in my life. I could buy this building. I could buy this block. But I couldn't buy the one thing I needed, her trust. I walked back to the car. Marcus didn't say a word. He just started the engine. Take me to the office, I said. I spent the next 3 days in a fugue state. I slept on the couch in my office. I ignored the board's frantic calls about our stock dipping 3 points. I ignored the PR team's drafts of apology statements. I just stared at the skyline, replaying every moment, every lie, every mistake. She was right. I had tried to control the variable. That's what I did in business. Eliminate risk, ensure the outcome. But people aren't assets. Love isn't a merger. I needed to fix this. But not with money. Not with a grand gesture that screamed, look at me. I needed to do something that screamed, I see you. I remembered the sketchbook. I remembered the drawing of the gown she said she'd never make. Blue silk she had written in the margins. Silver threading, like moonlight on water. I sat up. I grabbed my phone. Marcus, I said, get the car and find me the best fabric supplier in the city, the one the couture houses use. Sir? And find me a sewing machine, a vintage one. Singer, maybe? She said she liked the old ones. Are you taking up tailoring, sir? No, I said, standing up and buttoning my shirt. I'm proving a point. I spent the next 24 hours assembling a package. I didn't hire an assistant to do it. I drove to the garment district myself. I touched the silks until I found the one that felt like the dress she described. I bought the thread. I bought the best sketching pencils money could buy. And I wrote a letter. Not a typed memo. A handwritten letter on plain paper. Elena, you were right. I tried to write a script for our lives because I was terrified of the unscripted version where you didn't like me. I was a coward. I hid behind my money because it's the only shield I have. I resigned from the board of the staffing agency this morning. I transferred ownership to the employees. It's a co-op now. You don't work for me. You never will again. But I still believe in the girl on the balcony. I still believe in the sketches in your bag. You said dreams are expensive. They are. But they are also necessary. I'm not asking for a second chance yet. I haven't earned it. I'm just asking you to make the dress. Not for me. For you. The vegetarian shark. I didn't deliver it myself. I knew my face was the last thing she wanted to see. I sent Marcus. He came back an hour later. She took the box, sir. She didn't throw it at me. That's a win. Did she say anything? She asked if you picked out the silk yourself. And I told her you spent 3 hours arguing with a merchant in the garment district about the precise shade of moonlight. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you, Marcus. 2 months passed. Silence. I went back to work, but the fire was gone. I sat in meetings, listening to people drone on about profit margins, and all I could think about was whether she was using the machine, whether she was sewing, whether she ever thought about the brownstone. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, an invitation arrived at my office. It wasn't gold embossed. It was simple cardstock, hand-lettered. Emerging Designers Showcase. Small hall, Downtown Arts District. Row 4, seat 12. There was no note. Just the ticket. I stared at it for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Row 4. Not the front row. Not the VIP box. The middle. Anonymous. Just a guy in the crowd. I canceled my afternoon. I canceled my evening. I arrived at the venue early. It was a small, gritty warehouse space converted into a runway. The air smelled of hairspray and nervous energy. I found row 4, seat 12. It was a folding chair. I sat down, feeling overdressed in my suit, wishing I had worn the hoodie. The lights went down. The music started, thumping, bass-heavy tracks that vibrated the floor. Model after model walked out. Some designs were terrible, some were promising. I clapped politely, checking my watch, sweating. Was she here? Was this a mistake? Then the music changed. It shifted to something instrumental, something that sounded like deep sea silence. A model stepped onto the runway. She was wearing it, the dress, blue silk, silver threading, moonlight on water. It moved like liquid. It caught the lights and fractured them into 1,000 stars. It was breathtaking. It wasn't just a dress. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of standing on a balcony in the cold and feeling safe for the first time. The crowd actually gasped. I heard whispers. Who is that? Is that Silk? The model reached the end of the runway, posed and turned. Then the designer came out for the bow. Elena walked out. She was wearing a simple black outfit, her hair in that messy bun. She looked terrified. She looked beautiful. She stopped at the edge of the runway. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the VIPs in the front row. She scanned the crowd. Row 1, row 2, row 3. Her eyes found row 4, seat 12. She saw me. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just looked at me, held my gaze for 5 seconds, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. A nod that said, "I see you, and thank you." Then she turned and walked backstage. I sat there as the show ended, as people stood up and cheered. I stayed in my folding chair, overwhelmed. She had used the silk. She had made the dress. She had invited me. I made my way backstage, fighting through the crowd of family members and fashion students. I found her near a rack of clothes packing up. "Elena," I said. She turned. Up close she looked tired but electric. The adrenaline of the show was still coursing through her. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it. The dress, Elena, it was incredible. You are incredible. It's good silk," she said, touching the fabric of the gown hanging beside her. The merchant was right about the shade. "I have good taste." I tried a small smile. "You have expensive taste," she corrected, but there was no venom in it this time, just a weary acceptance. "Thank you for the machine. And the letter. I meant every word." "I know," she sighed, leaning against a garment crate. "That's the problem, Julian. I know you meant it. I know you weren't trying to be malicious, but trust it's like a mirror, you broke it. You can glue it back together, but you can still see the cracks." "I like cracks," I said softly. They let the light in. She looked at me, searching my face. "That's a line from a song." "Is it?" I thought I was being poetic. She laughed. It was small, hesitant, but it was there. "You are ridiculous." "Elena," I took a step closer but didn't touch her. "I'm not asking to be your boyfriend. I'm not asking to be your patron. I'm just asking, can we start over?" "Hi, I'm Julian. I work in finance. I have questionable taste in hot dogs, and I think you're the most talented person in this room." She bit her lip, looking down at her shoes, the same worn flats. Then she looked back up at me. "Hi, Julian," she whispered. "I'm Elena. I make dresses. And I'm currently unemployed because my previous agency got turned into a co-op, and I decided to pursue fashion full-time." "Bold move," I smiled, my chest feeling light enough to float. "Terrifying move," she corrected. "But I had a good investor." "So," I cleared my throat, "since you're unemployed and I'm hungry, would you like to get a hot dog? There's a cart outside. It's not raining, but I'm told they taste like victory." She hesitated. The history was still there. The lies were still there. But the dress was there too. And the letter. And the fact that I showed up to a warehouse in the arts district and sat in a folding chair just to see her shine. "Okay," she said. "Finally. 1 hot dog, but I'm paying." "Elena." "I'm paying, Julian," she said firmly. "That's the deal. Equals. Or nothing." I looked at her, fierce, talented, and completely unimpressed by my billions. "Deal," I said. We walked out of the warehouse together into the cool night air. We weren't holding hands, we weren't fixed, but we were walking in the same direction, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't care about the destination. I just cared about the company. That hot dog cost $3.50. Elena paid with 4 crumpled ones and told the vendor to keep the change. We sat on a concrete bench nearby, the streetlights buzzing overhead, my tuxedo jacket folded neatly beside me to protect it from the pigeon droppings. "So," Elena said, taking a bite of her hot dog. Mustard immediately dripped onto her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, completely unself-conscious. "How does victory taste, Julian?" I took a bite. It tasted like processed meat, stale bun, and questionable onions. "It tastes," I chewed thoughtfully, "like freedom, and a little bit like regret waiting to happen." She laughed. It was the sound I had missed the most. Regret is for tomorrow. Tonight is for celebration. You came to my show. You sat in a folding chair. You didn't check your phone once. I checked it once, I admitted, to make sure Marcus wasn't lurking in the bushes. Is he? Probably. He's very good at lurking. We ate in silence for a few minutes, watching the city move around us. Taxis honked. Teenagers laughed. A siren wailed in the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing out on something better. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Elena, I said, crumbling my napkin. What happens now? I know we said start over, but my life is complicated. My world is loud. Are you ready for that? Because if we do this, if we really try to do this, people are going to talk. The press, my mother. At the mention of my mother, Elena stiffened slightly. Your mother, she repeated. Eleanor Thorne, the woman who once fired a gardener because his shadow fell on her prize roses. That's an exaggeration, I winced. It was his shadow falling on her tea set. But yes, that's her. I'm not afraid of her, Julian, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. I've scrubbed floors for women like her. I've been invisible to them for years. The difference now is that I'm not invisible. Anymore, I have a name. I have a brand. And I have… She hesitated, looking at me. You have what? I have a billionaire who eats street meat with me. She smiled softly. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. I walked her to the subway station. I wanted to call a car. I wanted to drive her home in safety and luxury. But I respected the deal. Equals. She swiped her card, the turnstile clicked, and she looked back at me one last time. Good night, Julian, she said. Good night, Elena. I watched her disappear down the stairs, fighting every instinct in my body to follow her. The next morning, the bubble burst. I woke up to my phone vibrating off the nightstand. It was 6 a.m. Marcus, turn on the TV, Channel 4. I groaned, rubbed my face, and grabbed the remote. The morning news anchor was looking entirely too cheerful. Behind her was a grainy, zoomed-in photo. It was me, sitting on a concrete bench, eating a hot dog, next to a woman in a messy bun. Wank. Headline read, The Billionaire and the Mystery Girl, Julian Thorne's Budget Date Night. My stomach dropped. They hadn't identified Elena yet. Her face was partially turned away, but it was only a matter of time. The internet detectives were faster than the FBI. My phone rang again. This time it wasn't Marcus. It was her. Mother, I answered, sitting up and swinging my legs out of bed. Julian. Eleanor Thorne's voice was like ice cracking. Please tell me that is a carefully orchestrated PR stunt to make you look approachable to the working-class demographic. It wasn't a stunt, Mother, it was dinner. Dinner, she repeated, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. You are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You do not eat processed nitrates on a park bench with… Who is she, Julian? She looks like she cuts her own hair. Her name is Elena, I said, my voice hardening. She's a fashion designer, and she's the most real person I've met in a decade. A fashion designer? My mother scoffed. Please. I know every designer in the city. Who represents her? Does she show in Paris? Milan? She shows in the arts district, Mother, in a warehouse. And she's talented. This is unacceptable, she snapped. The annual shareholders gala is in 3 days. You are expected to attend with someone appropriate, someone who enhances the brand, not someone who looks like they took the subway to get there. She did take the subway, I said, feeling a perverse satisfaction. And I'm taking her to the gala. Silence. Dead, heavy silence. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Watch me. I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly. Defying Eleanor Thorne was not something one did lightly. She wielded social influence like a weapon. She could destroy reputations with a raised eyebrow. I called Elena immediately. Have you seen the news? I asked the moment she picked up. I have. She sounded calm. Too calm. My phone has been blowing up. Apparently, my messy bun is now boho chic, according to one blog, and a cry for help according to another. I'm so sorry, Elena. I didn't want this. Julian, we talked about this. We knew it would happen. My mother called, I said, bracing myself. She's not happy. I figured. I want you to come to the shareholders gala with me, I blurted out. In 3 days. There was a long pause on the other end. The shareholders gala, she said slowly. The one where tickets cost $20,000? Yes. I want you to be my date. Not as a fake wife, not as an employee, as my partner. I want to introduce you to everyone. I want to show my mother and the world that I'm serious. Julian, she sighed, you're asking me to walk into the lion's den wearing a meat dress. I'm asking you to walk in wearing your dress, I said. The blue one, or a new one, whatever you want. Just be there, with me. 3 days, she murmured. I'd need to finish the hem on the red silk, and I'd need shoes that aren't flats. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, she said. I need to think about it. If I do this, Julian, there's no going back. I become Julian Thorne's girlfriend. My work, my identity, it all gets swallowed by your shadow. I won't let that happen, I promised. I'll stand beside you, not in front of you. Let me think. She hung up. I spent the next 2 days in agony. I sent flowers, not roses, but wildflowers, the kind that grew in the cracks of the sidewalk. I sent a single text. No pressure. Just hope. The night of the gala arrived. The grand ballroom at the plaza was dripping in gold and malice. My mother was there, holding court in a dress that looked like it was made of steel wool and diamonds. She scanned the room, her eyes narrowing every time they landed on me. Where is she, Julian? She asked, approaching me with a glass of champagne. Did your little street urchin get cold feet? Don't call her that, I warned. I call it as I see it. You're making a mistake. You need a partner who understands this world, not someone who's just visiting. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. She wasn't coming. My heart sank. I couldn't blame her. Why would she subject herself to this? To the judgment? To my mother? It was too much to ask. I think it's time we announce the merger, my mother said, placing a hand on my arm, and perhaps introduced you to the daughter of the CEO of Omnicorp. She's here, you know, lovely girl. Went to Vassar. I'm not interested, mother. Julian, be reasonable. You are a thorn. We do not date the help. And then the room went quiet. Not the polite lull of conversation dying down, but a sudden, sharp silence that started at the entrance and rippled through the crowd like a wave. I turned. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was Elena, but it wasn't the Elena from the balcony. It wasn't the Elena in the oversized uniform. She was wearing a gown of deep, blood-red velvet that hugged every curve and pooled at her feet like liquid fire. The neckline was daring, plunging just enough to be provocative but staying firmly elegant. It was a dress that screamed power. It was a dress she had made herself. Her hair wasn't in a bun. It was loose, cascading down one shoulder in glossy waves. She wore no jewelry except for a simple silver cuff on her wrist. She didn't need diamonds. She was the diamond. She stood there for a moment, letting the room absorb her. She didn't look terrified. She looked like a queen surveying her subjects. Then she caught my eye, and she smiled, a small secret smile just for me. I forgot my mother. I forgot the merger. I forgot how to breathe. I walked toward the stairs. I didn't run this time. I walked with purpose. I walked like a man claiming his destiny. I met her at the bottom step. You came, I breathed, taking her hand. Her fingers were warm. You invited me, she said, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes on us. And I realized something, Julian. What? If I'm going to be in your shadow, she whispered, leaning in so only I could hear, I might as well cast a bigger one of my own. You look, I shook my head, at a loss for words. You look dangerous. Good, she grinned, because I saw your mother, and I think I'm going to need to be. I turned to face the room, keeping her hand firmly in mine. My mother was staring, her mouth slightly open. The board members were whispering. The photographers were going insane. Ready? I asked her. No, she admitted. Let's do it anyway. We walked into the crowd. The next hour was a blur of introductions. This is Elena Rossi. She's a designer. Elena, this is the senator. Elena, this is the ambassador. She was flawless. She didn't try to fake knowledge she didn't have. When someone asked about her lineage, she said, I'm self-made. My family taught me the value of hard work, not inheritance. It was a polite slap in the face to half the room, and they loved her for it. But the final boss was waiting. My mother intercepted us near the ice sculpture. Julian, she said, her voice tight. And, Elena, is it? Ms. Rossi, Elena corrected smoothly, extending a hand. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Thorne. Julian speaks frequently of you. My mother looked at Elena's hand, then at her dress. She didn't take the hand. That is a very bold dress, my mother said. Did you rent it? The insult was calculated, precise. I opened my mouth to defend her, to rage, to cause a scene. But Elena squeezed my hand, stopping me. I made it, Elena said, her voice projecting clearly over the nearby chatter. Every stitch, hand-draped. The fabric is a vintage velvet I sourced from a closing warehouse in the district. It represents resilience, something turning beautiful after being discarded. She took a step closer to my mother, not backing down an inch. You see, Mrs. Thorne, Elena continued, her tone polite but lethal, I don't need to rent power, I create it. And I don't need your approval to stand next to your son. I just need his respect, which I have. She looked at me then, her eyes shining. Right, Julian? Absolutely, I said, looking at my mother. She's the most impressive person in this room, Mother. And if you can't see that, then you're the one who's blind, not the gardener. My mother paled. She looked from me to Elena, realizing for the first time that she had lost. She had lost control. Well, my mother said finally, adjusting her stole, I suppose the stitching is competent. It was as close to a surrender as Eleanor Thorne ever got. Thank you, Elena smiled. Now, if you'll excuse us, they're serving mini hot dogs as appetizers, and Julian has a very specific opinion on mustard. She pulled me away. We walked out onto the balcony, the same one where we had met months ago. The cold air hit us, stripping away the heat of the ballroom. Elena sagged against the railing, letting out a huge breath. I think I'm going to throw up. She laughed, shakily. Did I really just talk back to Eleanor Thorne? You didn't just talk back, I said, wrapping my arms around her waist. You destroyed her. It was magnificent. The stitching is competent. That's basically a standing ovation from her. I was terrified, she admitted, resting her forehead against my chest. You didn't look it. I was channeling you, she murmured. The shark. How did I do? You're a natural. I looked down at her, this incredible, terrifying, brilliant woman who had gone from scrubbing floors to silencing matriarchs in a single season. Elena, I said, serious now. You know this isn't the end, right? The press is going to be relentless tomorrow. My mother will try again. The world, it's not going to get quieter. I know, she said, looking up at me. But I realized something else tonight. What? I don't want quiet. I want real. And you, she touched my cheek. You are the realest thing I've found. I kissed her then. Not a hidden kiss. Not a desperate kiss. A promise. I love you, I said against her lips. I love you too, she whispered. Now take me home. My feet are killing me and I have a business to launch. Your business? The dress? She grinned, pulling back. Did you see the senator's wife eyeing it? She asked for my card. I think I just got my first commission. I laughed, throwing my head back. Of course, she hadn't just survived the gala, she had monetized it. That's my girl, I said. Come on, let's go home. We walked out of the gala hand in hand, leaving the sharks behind. I knew there would be battles ahead. I knew my mother wasn't done. I knew the world would try to tear us apart. But as I looked at Elena, glowing in her red velvet armor, I knew one thing for sure. We were going to win. 5 years. That's how long it's been since the night of the red velvet dress. People ask me sometimes if I miss the old Julian, the ruthless shark, the man who measured his self-worth by the quarterly earnings, report of Thorne Heavy Industries. And I always tell them the same thing. I don't miss him because I barely remember him. I stood backstage at Paris Fashion Week, holding a lukewarm bottle of water and a packet of gummy bears, Elena's pre-show ritual. The air smelled of hairspray and adrenaline, a scent that used to terrify me but now smelled like home. Julian, a frantic voice called out. It was a production assistant looking terrified. We have a crisis. The zipper on the finale gown. It's stuck. I didn't panic. I didn't call a team of lawyers. I handed the water to a model and walked over to where Elena was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a cloud of white tulle. Let me see, I said, crouching down beside her. Elena looked up. Her eyes were wild, her hair a mess, but she was smiling. It's jammed, the fabric caught. I got it, I said. Marcus, give me the pliers. Marcus, who had transitioned from head of security to head of keeping Elena sane, handed me a small, multi-tool from his pocket. With the precision of a surgeon, or a man who had spent the last 5 years fixing everything from leaky faucets to broken supply chains, I worked the fabric free. The zipper slid up smoothly. Done, I said, standing up. You. Elena grabbed my face and kissed me hard. are the best assistant a girl could ask for. I prefer executive muse, I teased. Get out of here, she laughed, shoving me gently toward the curtain. Go take your seat. It's starting. I walked out into the auditorium. The lights were dim. The front row was packed with the elite of the fashion world, editors, influencers, celebrities, and sitting right there, in the center of the front row, wearing a custom charcoal gray suit by Rossi Couture, was my mother. Eleanor Thorne didn't clap loudly. She didn't cheer. But when I sat down next to her, she leaned over and whispered, "The stitching on the tulle is impeccable, Julian. She's finally learned how to handle chiffon. High praise." "Mother," I smiled. "Don't push it," she sniffed. But I saw her check the program, tracing Elena's name with a manicured finger. It was respect. And from Eleanor, that was love. The music started. The show was a triumph. Elena's collection was inspired by urban armor, clothing for women who had to fight to be seen. It was rough edges and soft silks. It was beautiful. When Elena came out for her bow, the applause was deafening. She didn't look at the floor anymore. She looked straight at the cameras, then at her team, and finally at me. She waved. A small, simple wave. I waved back. Later that night, we escaped the after-party early. We ended up on the balcony of our hotel suite, overlooking the Eiffel Tower. It was cliché, I know, but we had earned a little cliché. "You did it," I said, handing her a glass of cheap wine we found in the minibar. "Paris. You conquered Paris." "We did it," she corrected, kicking off her heels. "I couldn't have done the logistics without you. Or the zipper." "I'm just the guy with the pliers," I shrugged. "You're the guy who believed in me when I was scrubbing toilets," she said softly. "That's not nothing, Julian. That's everything." She leaned against me, and I wrapped my arms around her, resting my chin on her head. "So," I asked, "what's next? Milan? Tokyo? Mars?" "Actually," she turned in my arms, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I was thinking of taking a break." "A break?" I raised an eyebrow. "Elena Rossi doesn't take breaks." "Well, I might have to," she smiled, taking my hand and placing it on her stomach. "Because in about 7 months I'm going to have a new full-time job." I froze. The sounds of Paris faded away. The lights blurred. "Elena?" I whispered. "Are you?" "Yes," she nodded, tears filling her eyes. "We're going to need a bigger brownstone." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just picked her up and spun her around right there on the balcony, laughing until my chest hurt. I thought about the man I used to be, the lonely billionaire in the mask looking for answers in the stars. I thought about the maid shivering in the cold. I thought about the lie that brought us together and the truth that kept us there. I had spent my life building an empire of steel and glass. But holding her there, knowing we were starting a family, I realized I had finally built something that would last. So here's the truth about fairy tales. They don't end at the ball. The prince doesn't just save the girl. Sometimes the girl saves the prince from his own empty castle. Life is full of masks. We wear them to work, to parties, to protect ourselves from getting hurt. We think that if we show people who we really are, the messy, tired, hopeful versions of ourselves, they'll run away. But real love, real connection, that only happens when you take the mask off, when you admit you like hot dogs more than caviar, when you admit you're scared, when you look at someone who has nothing to offer you but their heart, and you say, "I bid on you." If this story reminded you that your worth isn't in your bank account but in your character, if it reminded you that it's never too late to rewrite your own story, do me a favor, hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with people who need a little hope today. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about love, redemption, and the kind of success that money can't buy. And in the comments below, I want you to write the word unmask, because maybe, just maybe, there's someone out there waiting to see the real you. I'm Julian Thorne, signing off. Now go find your balcony, and don't forget your jacket.